Happy New Year, I think. Or no? Is it the second
Yes,
time?
we already did that. We already did
I'm
that.
losing track of life right now, guys. It's crazy.
The desk messed you up. The desk messed you up.
Yes.
Oh, the death threw me off completely. What's up, guys? What's up, number one Marvel fan? What's up, Las Cruces, New Mexico?
Always from New
Well,
Mexico.
and more importantly, what's up, SCG and Newell? I mean, Newell is showing his face pretty regularly here now. So what's going on?
Not much, man. Just out here reading comics, collecting art, trying to have a good time. What about you?
It's been crazy producing a movie and also
Right.
trying to get ready for OAX. And
Yes.
so it's definitely been like a handful for me over here.
Yep.
How about you, Jason?
I haven't been producing a movie, but I am getting ready for OAX. So,
Yeah, you might want to avoid that at all costs. And I say that to most people. Don't get into it if you didn't find yourself falling into this industry already. But it's been a rough couple of years for most. I count myself probably one of the luckier ones, still impacted. But at the end of the day, we get to do what we do. And for me, the dream is to kind of take what we talk about here often and put it on the big screen. So that's kind of like a dream, that we're chasing. But anyways, today's a very, very special day because, one of the things that we promised to our viewers was to start having special guests join us on these streams. Obviously, Jason and I, when we started this, it was a very casual, fandom discussion for Valiant. And
Super
then what has it spiraled to and how did it lead to our guest today?
right. Yeah. I mean, JayJay or we'll have to ask her whether she prefers to go by JayJay or by Janet Jackson. Of course, the jokes probably abound with that. I don't know if anybody's ever asked her to sing or not, but we'll find that out in just a minute. But, she was very instrumental in the wonderful colors that abounded at she's been at Marvel and done some DC work too, but at the start of Valiant and then going over to Defiant. And so some of the things that we like to see as far as the process and stuff, she either done herself or she was overseeing that. So we're going to pick her brain some and some of the memories, which we forewarned her for. Fair enough. But we're going to want to pick her brains and, certainly feel free to ask any questions in the chat that might come up as well.
All right. So here we go. Without further ado, let's welcome JayJay.
Hi.
Hey. Welcome.
Thanks.
So JayJay, would you mind? I mean, for those who may not know who you are, would love for you to do a quick kind of intro, and then we'll kind of dive into and nerd out about some of the stuff that we're familiar with here, and really share with our viewers today.
Yeah, I guess my sort of front-facing work is just the tip of the iceberg because most of the actual work I've done has been kind of behind the scenes. I started out as a fan and worked with some other fans on a fanzine called the Comic Informer. And then we started doing a couple of comic conventions, and then we started Texas Comics. So I definitely came into it through the fandom. I moved to, Texas Comics, Bill Willingham's Elementals that I colored was then picked up by Comico.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always wanted to move to New York because my original dream was to be a painter, to paint paperback book covers and paint book covers. I was an admirer of people like Don Mates and Frank Frazetta and, Michael Whalen, people like that. And I wanted, to go into that business. So I always had wanted to move to New York City. And when I was working for Comico, Philadelphia was close enough. And I had originally done a little job for Marvel. we put on these comic conventions, and I met Jim Shooter at a convention, and I had showed him what I was doing at the time, which I was doing some magazine illustration for little things like the Space Gamer, which was a tabletop gaming magazine. I was really into tabletop gaming and D&D. Oh shit, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I forgot to put it on airplane mode. So sorry.
Well, at least your desk didn't fall over, so you're doing better than Carol.
Exactly. Yeah, what Jason's referring to is my death literally fell over right before this show. And so it was like the craziest thing that's ever happened. A big reminder to clean up, because I was going to clean up before the new year and I didn't. And I paid for it right before the show.
Wow.
Sorry, go on, JayJay.
So yeah, I had been doing illustrations, and one of the things I had been doing was technical illustrations and maps for the oil field industry, because I lived in Houston. And I showed Jim the things. And so he called me up a month or so later and wanted me to do the technical illustrations of art supplies for the Marvel tryout book. If anybody remembers that was obviously a really long time ago. And so, yeah, that was my first job for Marvel. I drew pictures of art supplies for the tryout book. And then when I was living in Philadelphia, working for Comico, Marvel, who had become more familiar with my work, started offering me more jobs. At the time, they were starting Star Comics. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Harvey had closed. And so there was a kind of a vacuum in the marketplace for that demographic, that young kid demographic. So Marvel started Star Comics, and they hired me to do some of the initial design work. I designed the logo, you know, did a lot of the original cell sheets and design pieces. So then that just led to me being hired as a graphic designer in the Marvel bullpen. But I kept on coloring at night, you know, as a side job. And because I had a background in printing, I had worked for map companies, I'd worked for printers, I had worked doing color separations. So I had this technical background. So I kept, the whole time I was at Marvel, I kept trying to sort of push the boundaries. I had been doing little things like working with the production manager to upgrade Marvel's production technology and procedures. And I had been trying to advance coloring. One thing that a lot of people don't know, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about the color process, is that hand color separations, which were being done at the time with all comics, were very expensive. I mean, if I remember correctly, and I may not because my memory sucks, but I believe that comics were being color separated for about $200 a page.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
Especially back then.
And the process was fairly arcane. But at the time that I was working at Marvel, the technology was starting to advance, where there was laser separations had been invented. They were literally coming into use while I was working at Marvel. And I was, because of my technical background, kind of on top of all this. And so I had started trying to innovate at Marvel, the coloring process. The alternative process, there were several processes going on at the time. I'm trying not to be too boring. For instance, when Bill Sienkiewicz did the Dune graphic novel, he didn't want it to be hand separated. And so he had all of his drawings shot onto photostats. And he hand painted the photostats. That's a difficult process because photostats they have a surface texture that's almost plasticky. Mm-hmm. Sure. And so when you paint on it, your work often comes out very blotchy. Bill Sienkiewicz is an absolute master of everything he does, so he made it work, and it was brilliant and gorgeous. But another process that people were using were blue lines, where there's a acetate sheet with the black lines over the color, and you paint the color underneath that acetate sheet. And those were both being used. Famously, Neil Adams' continuity comics were all produced on blue lines like that. And we were doing all that at Marvel. We were doing
Lynn Farley did that a lot as well, right? From
right, yes. So all of those techniques were being done. The drawback, well, they all had drawbacks. And because laser separations were coming into use and were cheaper than hand separations, I was trying to figure out a way that we could use the laser separation process. Because if you did a blue line, you would have to shoot a film positive of it, a transparency of the work, and then color separate that. So there was an extra step that wasn't very efficient, and it also wasn't very good quality. So I was trying to figure out a way to go directly to the laser separations. And I was working a lot with Bob Budiansky, who was incredibly supportive of this, figuring out this process. I did a couple of posters for him, and I did a bunch of promotion pieces for him. And, he really was instrumental in those very early days of me figuring out, how to take advantage of the new technology that was developing. And so when we started Valiant, we didn't have a lot of money. We were being funded by venture capitalists.
I understand.
Very bad way to go.
But yeah, it's really cool. I don't know, Jason or Noel. Noel probably won't be exposed to this, but I didn't realize a lot of this development happened at Marvel. I always thought, like, as a fan, I always thought, oh wow, like everything they developed for Valiant, and it was such a special presentation because we just haven't seen colors like that before, right? And so that's kind of cool to hear that.
Yeah,
it happened, incubated there.
I mean, for the time and for the technology, it was really revolutionary and cheaper.
Which is key if you're running low on money, right? And you're starting a new comic company.
It's key, yeah. It's key if you're a startup.
Regardless of whether you're doing Nintendo comics or if you're doing superhero stuff. So actually, I had one of the deals for right here for Rye here, so to show kind of everybody the deal and the process. But
let me try to figure this thing out real quick. I'm gonna highlight you real quick, Jason. There you go. Woo!
Yeah. Wow. So this is the scene where Mother God's tempting Rye to leave to save Japan, and of course we know that he does that, and then it's got the acetate word bubbles on the other side.
Right.
But and maybe you could speak to this, JayJay, but I mean, who knew that these things would be, I guess a rising tide lifts all ships, but who knew that these things would, people would start going, man, I'm going to collect these things, because they were just part of the process, right?
It was just part of the process. Yeah. Yeah. We, at Marvel, the color guides that were used for hand separations were not considered valuable at all. Not at all. I mean, I used to sell them to an old man who came around Marvel, and we would just buy up color guides. I sold him everything, probably for $20 a pop, $20 a book, and I thought it was highway robbery. I thought I was winning, And
no, I mean, at the times I would say you were winning at the times for sure.
Yeah,
because they were kind of in that price range up until recently. In the recent years, I feel like color guide has gotten a lot more appreciation as kind of like the original line art became out of reach, And so I do feel like, and man, looking at what Jason just showed, I want one of those. I'm actually curious, JayJay. I mean, what Jason just showed, like, would you mind sharing kind of what the process was like as we kind of look at it, and maybe you could kind of narrate it for us, what it took and how your hands touched this piece of artwork, because I think it will help us paint a picture of the process.
Well, excuse me, Jim Shooter knew we were friends, and Jim knew all of the innovation that I'd been sort of experimenting with at Marvel. I, kept him up on it. So when he started Valiant, he was really interested in taking that to its ultimate level. And it was really a group effort. Our early people at Valiant, we all pitched in and figured this coloring process out. I think I kind of spearheaded the effort because I had been kind of doing it at Marvel, but everybody that was there at the earliest time was contributing ideas. And our office manager, Debbie Fix, she was the hero that found the one copier that would print on the watercolor paper we wanted to use.
Wow.
I mean, so that's the thing about all these processes. Every comic book you hold in your hand, every piece of art in your hand, has an army of people, or in our case at Valiant, a very small army of people behind everything that happens, and none of these contributions were insignificant. It was amazing. It was a real group effort to develop this process. And, we found a color separator, the cheapest one we could find. And they had bought a machine they didn't know how to use. They bought a laser separation machine. I guess they'd gotten some basic training on it, and they really didn't know what they were doing. No. And so we would, in the early days on those Super Mario comics, the Nintendo comics, we would have all of the negatives shipped to our office, and I would sit at my desk on a light table and correct the negatives, because, for instance, Mario's red suit would have a bunch of blue dots in it and be looking brown. And so I would literally go into the negatives and paint out all the blue dots on the negatives in all of the red, and clean up the yellow so the yellow didn't look green. And, it was kind of ridiculous. Yeah. I saved our company a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Since you mentioned Mario, I mean, I think everyone knows the origins of this show started with kind of this TLDR surrounding Valiant comics. So, Jason and I are very passionate about it. He's much deeper than I. I'm probably more like the Valiant commercial fan. He is definitely a deep cut fan, and then we have Newell, who sat in between us while we were kind of geeking out, that now we've gone into as a fresh fan. Right?
I'm the noob.
And, yeah, so we're here from three different perspectives. But one of the things many people don't know is that Valiant Comics started with Nintendo license. And so I have, a lot of your works pulled up here and just your body of work. And, what's really cool is you definitely have contributed to the comic book industry in a really, really major way with your credits.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, the Valiant coloring system that we developed was a real innovation. I mean, it, became obviated by the rise of computer coloring, but for that one brief shining moment, it was pretty cool. And I remember somebody at DC saying that the first time their production manager looked at the process we were doing, they were like, wow, they're saving so much money.
Wow. It's so cool.
So when was it, of course, I know that you also started doing some writing too. Was that not until the Defiant days, which, I might be skipping ahead here, but Was that not to the Defiant days, or did you do some writing prior to that?
Well, I had been sort of just writing on my own stuff ever since I was about 12 years old. I think my whole life I've wanted to tell stories. I didn't become like a fine art painter. I wanted to be an illustrator because illustrations tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my whole life has been about, stories. I started getting very serious about my painting back in kindergarten and knew what I wanted to do. My path in life was clear.
I wish I figured that out because I went all over the place. Mine's like a squiggle line.
Well, you're telling a story one way or another, right? Because
Right.
you're assisting in telling the story. If you're coloring, you're telling the story literally through the art form or for the writing. So, what do you find more enjoyment in now that you've kind of done it all? I mean, what do you find more enjoyment in? Is just the writing side of it, or the coloring, or there's no favorite child here?
Well, one of my biggest problems as an employee, which I'm sure Jim Shooter would tell you, is that I'm a little bit of a control freak. And because I literally have done pretty much every job in the production of a comic book, I like to do all the parts. And recently, the job I recently did for Z2 Comics on their Motorhead graphic novel, I did all of it. Like, I drew it, I edited. It was based on a story, a video interview, with oh my God, I'm blanking. Twisted Sister.
Is it here, Motor Comics?
Yes, that's the one.
Got it.
Yeah. All about Lemmy. I'm actually kind of a fan of rock and roll heavy metal, so
Looks great.
was-
Oh my gosh.
it's
Man.
no, it's really nice. It's beautiful. It's probably one of the most beautiful books I've ever owned, much
Wow.
less worked on. So I was extremely happy. And I had worked with those guys on their Blondie book and on the Weird Al Yankovic book as well, but I just did pinups. On this one, I did a story. So I did a 4-page story and, edited the interview into story form, which isn't exactly writing, but it's a form of writing. And then I, penciled, inked, and colored it and lettered it. So I like to do all the parts. I have, it was kind of the dream of a lifetime at Valiant when I worked with Barry Windsor Smith, because he's literally indirectly responsible for me being in comics.
Oh,
In high school, I'd gotten out of fandom. I was really much more into art and painting, and I'd gotten out of comics fandom when the other art student in high school, the one other guy, handed me Conan #1. And I was lost. After that, I was a complete comics fan. I was just absolutely worshiping Barry and his work and would devour absolutely everything he did and bought every book of his work that came out, everything he was in. That was like my massive obsessive collecting thing was Barry. And then at Valiant on Solar Zero to work with him. Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow. And Barry is another person who doesn't like to let pieces of it go.
Oh yeah. So how did that work?
So Jim insisted that he let me color it. And Barry was like, I don't want it. I don't, very resistant to it. And the first issue, which, Solar Zero was broken up into segments. That first segment, I had a phone call with Barry. And to this day, it is probably the absolute top single most amazing phone call I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
Barry's knowledge of art is unparalleled. I have never met a human being who knew as much about art and art history as Barry. We had this amazing phone call and we talked about concepts. We literally came up with like the concepts of how the light that kind of represented Solar's powers would be displayed, you know, in kind of a rainbow shift. And, you know, we came up with like all this great stuff. And we talked about the mood of how color would set the scene changes. And it was this wonderful conversation, like peak experience of my entire life. And so I was really looking forward to the next one. And like the second segment, we had another amazing phone call, much shorter, half the phone call, but amazing phone call. And he loved what I did. Like he really liked what I was doing and was super complimentary, which was another thing that was like blowing my mind. And so when it came to do the third segment, he's like, "Oh no, you've got this. You're doing great." And I was like, but wait.
So I was gonna say, Janet, that one of the things that I think stood out a lot for Valiant, at least for myself, was like the lighting that you were talking about. This whole like solar lighting, like, and how it kind of breaks up, and
it's like all the light around him was being filtered through a prism or something.
Yeah,
exactly.
the energy
Exactly.
is so powerful, and like it was such a Valiant branded type of energy that kind of permeated through Unity, permeated through like all the comics.
Yeah,
it's really cool to hear that, you know, you were able to work with Barry to kind of design that in itself, because that's design, right? That's like energy design, universe design. Yeah,
it is, and it incorporates a lot of science, which Jim is the expert in that. Like Jim would contribute a huge amount to everything because he's so science-based. You know, Jim Shooter originally had a scholarship to be a scientist.
Huh.
Wow.
And no, he was set to study science in college and then was not able to take the scholarship because of family problems and life problems that got in the way. It's really, But then I also have been somebody who, in the course of doing graphic design, has studied a lot of color psychology. And like I said, Barry is amazing because he knows all this stuff. So it was an amazing experience just to work with these incredible people who are kind of just at the absolute top of their game. And to be included in that club was...
Yeah, I mean, you know, Valiant had, I mean, such tenured people from the Marvel bullpen, you know, switch over. I mean, and you know, you always hear these horror stories about, you know, when you get to meet your idols or people that you admire, that you're going to have this horrible story. And
got a few of those.
You know, and so I was fully expecting like a Barry Windsor Smith story like that, where you just go, "Oh my goodness," it was just like we were butting heads and stuff. So it's great that you didn't have that.
Working with Barry was literally the best experience of my entire life. He could not have been kinder and more generous and more in sync with me. It was wonderful. And, you know, I was a little afraid because he did have this reputation. You know, he had this reputation of being very difficult to work with. And yet, everything I had always heard about him and him being quote unquote difficult to work with was based in quality, not based in anything but his own idea of quality. And I just thought, well, that's like me.
Right.
Because all the problems I've ever had working with people have been based in quality and me wanting things to be better. In fact, at Valiant, Bob Layton gave me the nickname the Tweezer, because I would tweeze every single page that left the, you know, production. because I was involved in a lot of the end run aspects of it. Like coloring and production are at the end of the process. So if there were mistakes, that's where you fix mistakes, is at the end. Like, because that's the last gate that everything has to pass through. So I took it really seriously, maybe too seriously. Some people thought too seriously.
No, never too seriously. I can say from a publisher perspective, it's highly appreciated. I think often it is part of the process. I personally feel like modern comic books don't take it as seriously, and that's a lot of it is because it's more about the timeline and making the numbers versus creating art. And I think I would love for Newell to chime in on this too. Is I kind of began my comic art collecting journey from modern art, and I own a good amount of modern art, and even just got back into comics over the last decade. But after digging into modern art for a bit, I find myself gravitating back to nostalgic art, and when I look at them, put them side by side, you're right. Like, it feels like a whole office of people contribute to these pieces, and they're full of love. They feel like there's layers to it. Versus just being a very kind of a one-dimensional piece of artwork. I don't know if Newell, you've noticed the same, but I know you've acquired a few pieces recently that are a little bit more vintage. But yeah, that's something that everything Jen is saying really speaks to as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny because these days everything is done, even if it's drawn traditionally, like it's scanned and sent over. There's like less direct collaboration. I think you don't have all the people working together looking at the same art over each other's shoulder and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, a lot.
But maybe that's part of it, because everybody's kind of doing their own part. They're siloed, right?
Yeah. In a vacuum a lot of times. Right. Yeah, very much. And at Valiant, we all worked in one giant room.
So
on
fun.
Purpose.
So
like
fun.
That was the goal, to get that collaboration and that synergy going in the room.
So when Jim's out at Valiant, and he goes to create Defiant, was it like an immediate decision? I mean, did Jim recruit you over? Did you say, I'm going with Jim, or how did that work that you ended up going over there with him?
Well, Jim and I and Debbie were all fired the same day from Valiant.
Oh
no.
I mean, there was.
I'm curious why they targeted you guys. I mean, why? I mean, Jim, I kind of heard some stories. I kind of understand, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, no, it was a clear conflict of interest. Okay. Debbie and I both were long-term friends of Jim, like very close friends.
Got it.
And so, I mean, us being Jim Shooter loyalists, they knew they couldn't let us stay. I don't hold it against them. I mean, it's, it was a business decision, and they weren't technically wrong. They wanted to sell the company. The VCs that funded us were insisting that the company be sold. Jim used his percentage to block the sale, and so the VCs did what they had to do to get rid of him. So that, because I mean, VCs are like house flippers. They don't want to build anything long term. They don't care about quality. They don't care about building something. They just want to flip it, get their money, and move on to the next thing. I mean, that's the downside of VC capital. If you've seen Silicon Valley, the TV show, you might have a sense of like what they're about, and that's the truth. So
yeah, unfortunate side effect for sure. So of course,
so when Jim talked about starting Defiant,
Wars of Plasm, here we go.
Yeah, when Jim talked about starting Defiant, we were right there from the very beginning of the first conversation.
Nice.
It was me and Debbie both. So yeah, it was there. We were the first three to even start the conversation. And I don't know how many people know this, but we decided to definitely not go with VC capital, but to look for a strategic partner. And we found a trading card company that we thought would be a strategic partner and be a good partnership, which is why the first Defiant comics were trading cards, because that was our funding. Our funding was the River Group.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a couple boxes of those too. It's pretty funny. It's just in my garage.
Yeah.
Well, and Valiant, I think it goes to show you too. I know some of it has to do with people just it's work for hire, so people go where the money's at. But I think it's a testament too that with who followed over there to Defiant. I mean, David Lapham and some of these guys, just a great amount of talent. I mean, I feel like, and if you feel differently, this is just one man's opinion, but as far as Defiant goes, I feel like it was just a victim of timing. Unfortunately, it hit a wall right there with, money, timing, the 90s and all that kind of stuff. But, feel free to elaborate any more on that if you want.
In what, Defiant?
Well, yeah, I mean, because the story that, it never finished telling the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because Marvel sued us out of existence.
Yeah. So.
Well, no, is that what happened? I didn't know that.
So, So Jim told me the story with that. So I'm just going to kind of, tee this up for you. But Jim told me the story that there was Marvel owned like a similar name, and so they sued him, and there was like a whole trading card thing. Okay, so go ahead and
we made the mistake of putting out. We were so excited. We were coming up with Warriors of Plasm, or Plasm as it originally was, and we were so excited and so proud, and we put an ad in, I guess, the Diamond Comics, the distribution magazine.
Yeah.
Previews.
Yes.
We put an ad out 8 months before Warriors of Plasm was scheduled to come out. And that gave Marvel time to create a completely specious product called Plasmer that they created in Marvel UK. And then proceeded to sue us over it. Now, the lawsuit took a couple of years and $300,000 of our startup capital to fight. And at the end of the lawsuit, Marvel lost. They lost with prejudice. They were admonished by the judge because the judge caught Marvel employees lying on the stand. This is on the record.
Oh.
And this is public record. And at the end of the trial, Marvel came, the Marvel people came to us and they said, we're not going to stop. That they let us know that would be the first of many lawsuits until they put us out of business. And the reason they were doing that was because Valiant, when we started Valiant, in 3 years, we took 17% of the total comic book market share. And because Marvel was the big player at the time, most of that market share came out of Marvel. So they were incredibly motivated to not let Jim Shooter start another comic book company and get a foothold like that. So the River Group pulled our funding.
Oh, man.
And we had no choice but to shutter our doors right before the big crossover schism came out.
Which I think, catches us up to, what's happening today, because some really cool stuff happening that, Jason brought to our attention. So, Jason, you want to touch base on that?
Well, this is the untold story, the finished story. So, JayJay, I mean, feel free, as far as where everything's at in the project. I'm sure that some stuff has been put together. Are we pulling the old pages? Are we redoing pages? These are just the old stories that somebody dusted off. Tell us a little bit about this.
So at the time in the Defiant universe, we were going to do the big schism crossover, the big summer crossover. And Jim had promoted it as for the first time in the history of these big crossovers, the bad guys were going to win and the universe would start off from a completely different place. And it was really exciting. And we had, our top artists on it, really amazing people working on it. And Len Wein started writing it. But at the time, I think Len was going through a lot of problems and wasn't really able to meet the commitments of doing the writing on this. And so I had been writing a few issues, a handful, not many. I'd written a handful of issues at Defiant. Jim didn't have the time. So the deal was that I was going to write it, script it, not plot it. It was already plotted. I was going to script it under the careful supervision of Jim, because at Defiant, our offices were right next door to each other with an adjoining door in between. So I could always just poke my head right in and ask him if I got hung up, So I started writing it, and then that was about the time they shut us down. That was the time that we got closed. But because I'm a little bit of a hoarder, I kept all my notes and I kept all the pages. Like, I had copies of all the pages. And then this fan came along, Jake Weaver, who's just a big Defiant fan. And he had already, by the time he contacted me, Jake had already done an amazing amount of work, kind of collecting, a lot of the materials for Schism, for the crossover. And I really was hoping that Jim would agree to write it. But Jim just couldn't, make that commitment. And so I'm working with Jim. And at the time, we also had Pauline Weiss, Alan Weiss's wife, working for us as an editor. And so I think with the help of those two, like with their help and support, I should be able to finish the scripting on this. And yeah, Jake's got a Kickstarter running right now to fund the project. As far as I understand it, it's a single piece. It's scheduled like a one-shot. So, it being a one-shot fan project, not for profit, it doesn't violate whoever owns the IP and, the trademarks. So
yeah, that was going to be my question, because
that's everybody's question. That's everyone's question. That's why I addressed it right away.
Well, overall, I'm sure you're familiar with the Valiant Fans website. So valiantfans.com. That the Defiant Kickstarter and Defiant in general, I guess, the Kickstarter being launched, kind of, all these other posts that people have done in the past, all of a sudden people came back and said, yeah, let's talk about that again, and, I'm similar to them. I feel like that in the fact that we were Valiant fans and just kind of crossed over into what I call Valiant cousins, but because it kind of went on into, Broadway comics as well. So, but yeah, so everybody's talking about it. So hopefully that means that everybody's backed it. I know I have, because I do look forward to being able to read the finished product.
Yeah,
absolutely. So do I.
so JayJay, I had a question for you too. Obviously there's a Schism, there's a crossover event, but as a fan, for me, I remember buying some of the early Defiant books, but I didn't really kind of deep dive. And I think that was kind of around the same time I was myself discovering Cars and Girls. And so I definitely kind of moved away from comics. But if I was to I'm gonna back this, and then are there like a prerequisite of reading material you would suggest? Like, should I go and find the old libraries, or is this like a one shot that can live on its own?
Well, originally, the way it would have been written would have been in the continuity, assuming that fans were at least somewhat conversant with the Defiant universe, but that's not possible anymore. We can't expect every fan who wants to back this project to go and buy or download and reread the entire Defiant universe. And so that's actually one of the challenges of writing it, is I have to make it stand alone as a one shot. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Weiss earlier. So Alan, don't they own the War Dancer?
That's in question. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I think that Alan does want to do something with War Dancer, and I've heard through the rumor mill that there's talks, but I don't know the status of that. No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. As things get sold and bought and sold, and it gets really messy behind the scenes. So.
As far as I understand it, I used to have a friend who worked at Classic Media, and they didn't know what they had. They owned so many properties, so many IPs. They did not know what they owned. I mean, I'm sure there was a master list somewhere, but they clearly did not know what everything on that list was. And I remember he was told, my friend that worked there was told to clean out a closet of a bunch of Broadway books, and just they didn't know what they were. It was a closet full of books. They're like, just get rid of it. They did. So I know that Classic Media IP was sold to DreamWorks. And then honestly, I lost track of all the sales after that. I think it went through several more hands. I don't know who owns the IP. However, you might be familiar with some of the Star Trek fan movies that have come out. And some have even been Kickstartered. And obviously the Star Trek IP is something that's probably a much more assiduously guarded than the Defiant IP,
Right.
And yet these one-shot projects that are fan projects, I don't know it. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the legal things, but there's a lot of fan projects that come out that don't seem to be considered to violate the IP. And they're obviously not done for profit. They're not done on a continuing basis. So I don't think this project does violate the IP or the trademark. So
yeah, hopefully
that's my understanding. I don't know.
Hopefully some lawyer somewhere, doesn't decide to stir things around and mess up anything for somebody. Because like you said, they got so much IP sitting in a closet somewhere. It's like, this from a comic book company in the 90s. I mean, what, but who knows? So I know that
the project is not, there's nobody making money off this except the creators that are being paid. Like the people literally doing the work are the only people who are being paid, and there's a lot, like they're not printing this in China. Like a lot of comics are printed. They're printing it in America. I feel like they're going after the best quality. And I mean, I'm interested in being attached to the project because I feel like they're doing things kind of the right way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're going for the highest quality and trying to pay people fairly. And if there's any overages, they've committed to give that money to the creators, which,
So I know that Jim gets around to, comic conventions still fairly frequently. And I know I asked you via email, were you going to any cons? Because I have, I believe you worked on Web of Spider-Man 32.
Yeah. I mean, your body of work is outstanding.
I got a lot of stuff that needs, JayJay's signatures on them. I've got a bunch of, I got a bunch of Valiant stuff, slabs over there that I've got signed by you, but I got some other stuff too. But yeah, so do you have any plans to visit any cons and kind of get into that racket at least a little bit?
I don't have firm plans, but right now I've been working on 2 different projects. This is where it gets complicated. Okay. I have 2 different projects that are kind of long-term projects. I have a graphic novel that I'm working on, and I have a book that I've been starting to write, doing the research for, that's on, I don't have a title for it yet, but it's on the history of comic book coloring.
Ooh.
Ooh.
See, you know how there's that thing where you see misinformation and you're like, someone on the internet is wrong. And you're like, ugh. So I had seen so much information, like misinformation and misunderstanding, and people putting out these sort of histories of comic book coloring that just contain stuff that's not quite right.
There's a whole Reddit thread on this topic as well. I mean, it's
I bet.
a really big topic.
Well, and I've also seen professionals that I've worked with who literally are spreading misinformation. Like I saw one guy on Facebook say that when things were hand separated, they were separated into 4 different plates. And I'm like, 4 different plates? We're talking 16 different plates. I've been to the hand separators and seen the plates they were working on. There's 16 of them for most comics, not all comics. So, you know, just a kind of people think because it's 4 color, it's 4 plates, but that's not it. It's a plate for every different dot percentage.
Wow.
And at Marvel, we used 3 different dot percentages plus black. So essentially, and solid, which makes 4 times 4, which is 16 plates. I know, now I'm getting too technical.
That's really cool. I'm also scrolling through, this Medium article that I found and kind of finding some of these old photos.
Yes, I've seen that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate, the work and effort that got into all this. And yeah, it's a science, just in the way you're breaking it down. Visually, I'm excited to see this book come together.
Well, it's interesting because it started out, kind of wanting to correct the record. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the real story is not the technology. The technology is a part of the story. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized there are these absolute superheroes who have advanced the technology and done amazing, genius things that have changed the entire shape and future of the industry. And while the book does have technical explanations in it of how these things worked, the stories that I really want to tell are the stories of these heroes.
Speaking of heroes, JayJay, there is a question from the audience.
Okay.
Comic book videos and essays says, who designed? Is this the same Janet Jackson who designed the logo for Heroes for Hope? Maybe you could share a little bit of a story about that.
Oh my God!
I'm gonna step out for a second, but I'll be right back.
Oh, there is a crazy story about the Heroes for Hope logo. So, the Heroes for Hope logo, it's just the X-Men logo with a heart in it. It's nothing fancy, but I did it and I got credited on the first page of the book. Now here's where the story comes in. We had originally, the Heroes for Hope book was to raise money for the famine in Africa. And we had originally targeted a charity to give the money to. when the man, the representative of the charity, came to Marvel's offices to pick up the check, he was in a meeting, in the conference room with Jim Shooter and Jim Galton, the CEO of Marvel, and the principals of the company. And this man starts flipping through the comic. And he looks and he sees my name on the inside front cover. And he's like, Janet Jackson? You can't use her name in your comic book. What did she do on this comic? And Jim Shooter is like, no, that's our graphic designer. And he's like, well, it's a violation. You can't use Janet Jackson's name. And it's a printed book. It's been sold.
Uh-huh.
And this guy refused the money because my name was the same as Janet Jackson's name. And we found another famine charity who happily took the money we had raised and did good work with it, I'm assuming.
Wow.
It's such a crazy story. I don't even know what to think about that, but yeah.
Yeah. So the same person says he calls the guy Midas. He showed up to meeting covered in gold.
Oh my God! Yes, he did. He showed up in like an $800 suit, dripping with gold chains and diamond rings. This man, Jim. I didn't want to be like that, but also like when you're the head of a charity, especially for famine in Africa, helping famine in Africa, is it really good optics?
Yeah. I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
Speaking of designs, if you guys don't mind me chiming in, a bit of a pivot, but it kind of goes back to me nerding out about JayJay's contributions to my personal fandom. Is I think both Newell and Jason knows I'm a huge fan of Archer and Armstrong. Yep. So would love to hear more about that collaboration with Barry. This logo, did you design this? I mean even just overall like trade dressing across Valiant, like if you were to scroll through your body of work, so much of it like stands out. Like you look at Eternal Warrior, also one of my favorites. You scroll through and you see Magnus. I mean, these all really stood out. Would love to hear your kind of give us some storytelling surrounding the designs of Valiant. I mean, just in general, trade dress logos. What was most memorable?
Yeah, in the early days, I was doing the logo design because, being kind of that jack of all trades type person, it's very valuable when you work in a startup. It's less valuable when you're in a big company and you have to be a specialist. But as a startup, I'm like a good person for that initial building phase. And so, yeah, I did a lot of the initial logo design that you're showing on screen now. And then after that, we ended up hiring much more talented people than me and getting better logos. But yeah, some of the early ones, the Harbinger, the Magnus, the Solar, some of those early ones were me with Jim's guidance. Like, I don't want to, it wasn't like I was assigned this job and I went away and did it. We were all in one big room, and everything that happened in that room was kind of a team effort. I'd be showing things to Jim, and I'd be showing things to David Lapham, and I'd be showing things to, the other people around the room, and everybody would kind of weigh in and give opinions. And that kind of team synergy was incredibly productive. It was amazing. I couldn't even pick apart the parts that I did from the parts that everyone else suggested. I mean, my hands might have been the hands that drew the actual logos on the paper or illustration board. But, there were so many people who contributed. it was like this amazing synergy. I've never experienced anything like it before or since. Valiant.
That was literally the word I was about to say. Synergy. It
Yeah.
felt like every logo looked so different and unique to the property,
Yeah.
but it all had this synergy that aligned it all. And I guess a detail I always had a question mark on. I don't know if you ever wondered this, Jason, but why is Magnus's U a V? Like, was there a reason that design choice was made?
Oh yeah, to make it
Futuristic? Is
Roman.
It? Oh, Roman. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. I was always-
It's like a Roman
Got
letter.
it.
We wanted it to have that. Well, I'm a big history fan,
Okay.
and we had other people on staff as well who were interested in history. And I mean, we were trying to incorporate, whether it works or not, I don't know, but we were trying to incorporate a sense of the continuity of history running through all of time. I was already working on a basic, very, very nebulous concept for the Eternal Warrior. Like, I had this idea kicking around in the back of my mind for something like the Eternal Warrior. It was my original idea was pretty unlike what the Eternal Warrior became.
Okay.
But it was like this guy that lives forever. You know, a man was born in ancient prehistorical times, not caveman days, but, you know, in prehistory, and he just lives and doesn't die and doesn't know why. And originally I had his nemesis being a man who was reincarnated, but reincarnated with his memories, you know? And so the Eternal Warrior's like nemesis throughout time was this incarnation. And that obviously never happened in the comic book. But yeah, that was the nebulous kind of unformed idea that was kicking around in my head when we created the Eternal Warrior. So
yeah, in fact, number one Marvel fan, who will soon become the number one Valiant fan, says early days cover and designs really pull people in. Every book was awesome, but was hard to find copies of. Yeah, I agree. I sometimes missed issues and I had to chase them down at different stores, and I think there was a limited print run, which I think was one of the kind of one of the big reasons why a lot of early Valiant books became very valuable as well, right?
Yeah, for the collector market. I mean, we didn't limit the runs. We printed to order. We printed as many copies as the comic stores ordered. So it wasn't like we artificially limited anything, but we didn't have warehouse space, so we couldn't pay to overprint.
Yeah, no, I agree with that sentiment as well, because I also felt that now that I know you guys were designed based on history, actually it makes a lot of sense, because the way Valiant treated kind of the multiverse was always this essence of this timeline where, you know, I think Jason and I would talk about this often, where it's such a great idea to be able to show multiple versions of a character through a timeline instead of a multiverse, because now there's this tie-in to you know, the same world, instead of like having us jump all over the place. Because I feel like that's kind of where Marvel lost its traction, at least the MCU goes, is when they start introducing too many alternate universes. Because once you have all these alternate universes, now it doesn't matter anymore, because now one can die and someone comes back. But when Valiant, when Rai died, that was a really serious situation, because Rai actually died in that timeline, and there would have been another version of him through these you know, nanotechnology that kept him alive. And so it's really cool to even see like Archer and Armstrong now. It explains a lot, because it almost feels like a metal press, like a letter press in a way, like a stamp in a way. And then also
I think Jim Novak did that logo. I can't remember.
It's interesting because how about Shadow Man? Since Newell, his exposure most recently, he's been kind of going through the catalog, and Shadow Man was one of the
That was
later
the first.
ones one of the first that he read.
Yep.
What was the design aesthetic and thoughts surrounding this? And then after this, we have a question from Wolverado as well.
Well, we were, if I remember correctly, we were looking for the Valiant universe wasn't really magic based, but we were looking for a way to introduce magic, but introduce it into the Valiant universe in a way that was that fit with the overall scheme of the universe, which was fairly science based.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can call it that in a comic book, but so I had started doing some research into the different sort of types of magic that people, that some religions believe in. And we kind of hit on voodoo. And
Great.
I thought it would be interesting. There was this crazy little shop downtown that sold all kinds of books on magic in Manhattan. And I went down there and I bought everything they had on voodoo. And one of the books they had was this weird little, almost like, remember when people used to make newsletters and they used to staple them and fold them out of 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper? It was almost like that. It was like this weird little homemade, almost handmade book that this place was selling. And it had what I think was, like a real sort of hands-on, very, made by somebody who was a voodoo practitioner.
Trippy.
Yeah. And so a lot of the kind of early thing about Shadow Man, the thing is everything changed after we left, but the original concepts, we were trying to do something that was very based in these belief systems and these, it was I think the original concept for Shadow Man was fascinating.
Oh, it was my favorite for sure, hands down.
And the supernatural stuff, the more magical side of it, is what kind of drew me to that one and made me want to read that one first.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I can't say. I didn't read the books after we left, so I don't know what they did. I've only heard secondhand. It's just too painful.
Yeah.
It's just too painful. I did look at, I was in when I got fired, I was in the process of writing Archer and Armstrong, the issue of Eternal Warrior where he fights Armstrong and they have a big battle. And basically in the course of them fighting and not just trading insults, but in the course of them fighting, I was writing an exploration of their entire history together as brothers. And sort of, how siblings will dredge up old things that happened? Well, these guys have a couple of thousand years of old things to dredge up. And that's what I was doing with that issue. And then I picked up the issue and they didn't even use my notes.
Oh, no. Speaking of voodoo, look at my mouse pad.
Oh my God.
Yeah, literally, everything you're saying just, brings goosebumps to me because I just love Archer and Armstrong, Eternal Warrior, that whole segment of the magic voodoo world. Oh, there we go. Nice.
So this is a correction that Barry Windsor Smith did, and so this is the issue that you're referencing. That you said they didn't use your notes, but he drew, and it's it's a flip book. The Eternal Warrior is the same as Archer and Armstrong,
right?
And so this is where they crossed over, the three brothers and stuff. So yeah, definitely cool beans. You said you were on ask the questions in the chat, Carl?
Yeah, we got a question in the chat for you. And this kind of jumps off the whole design aesthetics is Wolverado, what is your opinion on chromium covers? Is it artist innovation or distraction?
Well, I'm not really a collector. I can only tell you at the time Valiant was looking for a way to get more sales, and I believe it was John Hart that suggested doing some of these special things like that to try to drive sales. Doing the flip, Jim had come up with the flip book to try to get attention, because we weren't growing as fast as we wanted to. We weren't really getting that much attention in the marketplace. And then once we started doing these kind of gimmicks, it got us attention, and then the stories kept the attention. And so it's like, if you have to stand on the street and wave a big card, to get people into your store, but then they actually like what's in the store, then I guess, standing in a clown suit waving a big card outside the store works, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
I love that. Maybe I should dress up as a clown for the next Comic Con and go come visit the booth.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on whether I don't have an opinion on the chromium covers and all the gimmicks from a collector's point of view. But they did what they were supposed to do to get us the readers, to get us the eyeballs. So yeah.
And then Comic Book Videos also made the comment bragging about the Valiant books were some of the best comics ever. So
they were.
That was. It all starts with story, and Jim wrote something like 80% or 85% of the comics, the first year's comics of Valiant, for the superheroes, obviously. That's down to him. He's an amazing writer. He's an amazing creator. I've been working with him since 1983, 84. And he has an impressive mind. Just the way his mind works is, I've met very few people who were on his level.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's great. You look at even just the folks you mentioned between Jim and Barry, you scroll through their body of work, it's just endless scrolling. Just how much they've touched. And I feel like I'm a big believer that the more you touch, the more it also inspires what you create. Absolutely. So it goes both ways, right? So I think things just get a little bit more power, more. And then Thiago, he wanted to kind of spoil the secret here, but I don't know if you knew this, Janet, but one of our hosts here, he actually has probably the entire print run of Torque #1s.
Nowhere near that. Nowhere near that. I have 230 plus copies of Turok 1, which was a chromium cover. Not the first one. Bloodshot 1 was the first cover, which was a Barry Windsor Smith cover.
Okay. I think that was after my time.
It was.
Yeah, a lot of people literally, Valiant grew exponentially after we were fired, but our work was already in the pipe.
Yeah, the momentum was already pushing it.
Yeah. So months of the work that we had done was still coming out after we were gone.
So I got another question here. So I know that Valiant, especially the early days when you were there, was known for a house style of art. That it was very succinct across the various titles, which I liked. But not everybody likes that, right? It's more people, especially into the 90s, where you got all these flashier artists and such. So do you feel like was that a direction of Jim, Don, Barry Windsor Smith that said, hey, let's kind of put this all in, because it seems that after Jim's tenure, the deal was that they went more towards the artist and less away from the story.
Because they had the money.
Well,
Because
I guess
they had
that's
the money.
so you're saying it was just because they had the money to pay the artist as opposed to before. So was it an act of necessity that there was a house style, or was that
100%?
Okay.
100%. We were the first people to hire David Lapham.
Mm-hmm.
We were the first people to hire a whole bunch of people right out of the Kubert School or right out of just sending in samples. We were so many people's first job in comics. They didn't. The only thing Jim had was to be able to direct them to do a kind of a minimum professional level. So what people interpret as a house style was just simply Don Perlin and Jim Shooter and Bob Layton and, you know, the people who were directing the artists. It was just purely them trying to get something that was a basic professional level out of these people who were complete newbies in the business. I mean, we lucked into getting Barry Windsor Smith, and that was like a massive dream, but that was much later on. You know, in the very beginning, we were using people who, you know, didn't know what they were doing. And so, you know, people like, well, Art Nichols was in there too, directing people. And so when Jim would do layouts, or Art Nichols would do layouts, or Don Perlin would do layouts, then the artists would follow those layouts. So you can see that it kind of turned into a house style, but it was never meant to be that way. It was just meant to get these newbies up to a professional level. And David's work really stood out because David Lapham progressed so quickly, he no longer needed the help with layouts and the advice of the people. And, you know, Bob was inking so much, and Bob was training the inkers. And so the very fact that these inkers were learning from Bob, their styles were similar to Bob's style.
Mm-hmm.
And so what people interpret as a house style wasn't intentional. It was just organically grown out of what we were trying to do with no money.
I guess it's like Bob Ross would say, you know, one of those happy accidents, right? And because you know, as far you can see the house style, and it does kind of progress. And I guess that's from what you were saying, as these noobs are getting better and better, you know, it's just kind of starting to you know, rise to the surface. That makes sense.
Well,
Really
you know,
cool.
as they got better, they started developing styles and, you know, paths of their own, and then they were let loose on the work. But in the very beginning, you know, Jim was literally laying out massive amounts of the comics, and people were following his layouts, or Art Nichols' layouts, or Don Perlin's layouts.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I also realized, I mean, I didn't realize how many, now that you bring it up, I didn't know it was David Lapham's, like, you know, first gig. I know it was like Sean Chen, Bernard Chang, but I think those guys came after you, right? And so I do feel like, as much as there's a lot of new artists, you could tell like there was a lot of guidance behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what made it really powerful, where, you know, because these artists truly collaborate in person and guided the young talent in person, I think it allowed the house to all be consistent. And again, goes back to that synergy that it created. Because if you scroll through kind of like the library of Valiant books history, all those ones that you guys hands touched and you guys worked on early on really stood out because they felt consistent, they felt special. They and then some of these other ones now, they definitely are has their own kind of brand aesthetics. But when
Yeah.
it comes to art style aesthetics and story aesthetics, it wasn't really as aligned as what you guys were putting out. In fact, Bob Lane is still going strong. I feel like, he's in the art community. He's still doing commissions. In
Okay.
fact, I see him work on Barry, any titles that Barry's touched before, and he turns on like a little Barry in him, and it looks
Okay.
kind of Barry, in the way he
Okay.
does his commissions. It's really interesting.
I haven't kept up with it. Honestly, I've been trying to work on my own self-publishing projects because the two projects, the graphic novel and the coloring history book, are so time-consuming. I've been actually self-publishing coloring books and activity books to try to get some income coming in to support my work on these other longer-term projects. So I've just been so focused on my own stuff that I haven't had a chance really to pay attention with what is going on in the comic book business.
Yeah, talk to us about what you've been up to. Here's your website, Serious Design.
Yeah.
Quite a body of work outside of comics for sure.
Yeah, and actually, if you go to seriouspublications.com, you can see a list of the books that I've been working on, self-publishing. Yeah, it's
All right, here we go. Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm actually I just came out with that reverse coloring book. I'm a big fan of Dr. Martha Beck, who I actually just went to see a talk with her at the launch of her new book last week or a week ago. And I've always known, like, a lot of what she says resonates with me because, for instance, as I quote her in that book, the antidote to anxiety is not calm, it's creativity. Creativity and anxiety cannot coexist in the brain at the same time. They're literal opposites. And when she said that, I was like, oh my God, that resonates with me so hard because I've always known that. As being an artist since I could hold a pencil, I've always known that when you do anything creative, when you do anything that's art related, you go into this flow state that's very transformative, and it's inherently relaxing. So, yeah, I've been putting out, I've been writing for a while. I've written a bunch of these books. I'm also Victoria Kincaid. That's another pen name.
Cool.
And I've been using my drawing talents to do some coloring books, both for children and for adults. And I've just been trying to do that basically just to get some income coming in to kind of support these other longer term projects that I want to do. So there's that ongoing effort, and being a one-person publishing company is time consuming to say the least.
Yeah, you're quite a Renaissance woman. It's amazing seeing all the different facets and even just the different pen names and how you touch different things. And it's really impressive how you're able to pivot creatively into all these different ventures.
Well, I'm incredibly curious, and that curiosity leads me down a lot of different paths. But it also kind of fractures my efforts because, I have a little bit of that shiny object syndrome, where I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this. And I'm like, it makes it a little challenging to focus sometimes, which is why all of the books I'm self-publishing don't fall into one category, but I'm working on that. I'm trying to do better. So.
Well, I dropped the Serious Publications link in the chat. So if anybody's interested in taking a look at any of that work or picking up any of that. Also, earlier we dropped the Defiant Project Kickstarter link. So if anybody's interested in that or catches this on the rewind, be sure to check that out. And so Newell, you've been all quiet over there. You just taking it on in or what?
Yeah. No, this has been really, really interesting. I look forward to seeing your coloring history book. That sounds awesome.
I think it'll be really interesting. I mean, obviously, it's going to have a lot of illustrations in it, but just you just can't. I mean, I'll be releasing parts of it as I finish writing them, because I want people to be kind of up to speed all along. But just I'm encountering these amazing untold stories. Everybody I talk to, I just uncover these amazing untold stories, and it's literally changed the shape of the book that I'm writing, because people like Jack Adler, people like Rich Corbin, these people were innovators on a level that almost no one understands right now today. And that history, I don't want it to be lost. Like, I'm one of the last people with such a wide, varied technical background. I think I'm one of the last people who can, kind of explain this from a firsthand perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is a little different from people who have never done it hands-on.
Sure.
So I'm hoping that I'll bring that perspective to it and tell do justice to the stories of these amazing heroes who have innovated our business and changed the shape of things.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you were talking at the beginning about, all the innovation and stuff that you were doing at the time, I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. Somebody should write a book about that. So
yeah,
that's great. I think that's awesome.
Well, that's another thing. It's like I'm one of, in my very, very, very small way, I'm one of the innovators. You know what I mean?
For sure.
I mean, it's almost insignificant, but I do have that perspective of being, a very insignificant part of that amazing group. So
lived history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since you mentioned you're a hoarder, I'm also curious on what the visual elements of that book will be like. I'm sure there's probably a ton of photos and kind of scraps from like the workflow. I'll be so excited to see what you're about to put in that book.
Yeah. I literally, oh my God, I started out, my first job in graphics was drawing maps. For a competitor to Rand McNally. Those old-fashioned maps that unfolded into giant sheets of paper. Yeah. Yes, I used to draw those.
Oh, wow.
And that in and of itself was color separation, because every color on those old road maps is a different plate. And so that was my first job in graphics, was drawing maps. And so that was like the 70s.
Well, you said you worked for a oil company.
I was a freelancer for the oil industry.
Oh, okay.
I did illustrations of, what would happen was with the oil industry would come out with new machinery. And before they actually produced the machine, they would have to have a sell sheet to sell the machine before it was in production. And they would give me blueprints of the machinery, and I would turn it into these technical drawings that would be these splashy, beautiful technical drawings that they would put on the sell sheets to sell the machine before they were producing it.
Oh,
and
so
sometimes,
cool.
well, I was good at reading blueprints, but there were literally some that were so difficult. I would have to take and build a model of the machine, photograph the model, and draw from my photographs just to get all the angles right. So that's what I was doing with the oil industry, but it was more as a freelancer.
Yeah. So my first, Carl, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but the first time I contacted JayJay was from her calf gallery. So I went on Comic Art Fans, and she hasn't been on there in quite some time. I'm not trying to shame you or anything.
Oh, no. I think I
Can we visit her gallery?
Is
it JayJay Jackson or Janet Jackson? What's the name on the gallery?
Oh, I don't even know.
I'm
I'm sorry.
trying to remember offhand. So she had some of the color guides on there and whatnot. And I said, look, if you ever think about getting rid of any of these. So that's how so then I went, I think I Googled your website, and that's how I got your email address. I said, hey, are you a big fan? You thinking about getting rid of any of these? And so, so hopefully she'll, share with the world and the CAF, CAF family, as it were, some of that stuff that she mentioned, hoarding away.
Yeah, as far as color guides, I don't have too much left. Like I said, there was this older gentleman who used to come up to Marvel, and I sold him like all my color guides. And what I have never seen any of those color guides back on the market. I've never seen them for sale. Like this man back in the 80s was an older gentleman. And if he said he had a warehouse, and if he passed away and that warehouse was just cleared out, then all that stuff is gone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea whatever happened to it. But a lot of the work that I did that I sold that man has never resurfaced. I have a little bit. I have some early Elementals stuff from Comico.
I think we know somebody that would like to see that.
I do. We do.
Yeah, I mean, I have little bits and pieces, but not much. There's not much left. I mean, over the years, I'm a freelancer. The work is so up and down. I get into a money crunch and then I sell stuff off. So
yeah,
a lot of it's gone.
Here's your library of works that's been posted on Comic Art Fans. Anything you recognize? I mean,
Sure.
here's a nice Craven piece.
Ooh.
Last Hunt. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's cool.
Amazing. That's a great piece.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really enjoyed working on that. I like Mike Zeck's work.
Oh yeah.
Unity Zero, of course. This was a really fun moment here when Erica falls down naked, and I remember it was so provocative as a kid. I'm like, whoa, what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I consider Solar Zero the best thing I've ever done. The best thing I've ever worked on, the best project.
Wow.
I mean, I mean, I love Harbinger, especially Harbinger 1. I love the work I did on Harbinger. I love the work I did on Plasm, but boy, there was nothing like working with Barry Windsor Smith, man.
Wow.
Nothing like it.
Let's go back to. I have a question about Plasm, and then we'll get into Barry. Was there a reason why there was this kind of fluorescent feel to what I can remember on everything Plasm? Was that kind of intentional?
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
world building?
definitely. We wanted to give Plasm this very unreal look. It's another dimension, and we wanted to make it as unlike our own dimension as we possibly could. But I drew all the colors from nature. I was literally trying to use flowers, and I don't know if you've ever looked at pond scum.
Yes, I do have.
But I mean, there's pond scum that's literally almost
funny.
fluorescent green. And I was
Like a bioluminescence thing.
Almost.
So
It's approaching that. And so we were literally trying to do something that was representative, that was representing a world that was outside of normal experience. And so I was trying to use colors that would have been very much oversaturated nature colors, and trying to draw a difference between the coloring that's in the real world. Because then when I would have to color our dimension, I would try to tone down the colors and the color scheme, try to make the color scheme very different.
Yeah, very different. I mean, look at Solar Zero. This is another moment in Solar Zero. You mentioned this is your favorite book you've worked on.
Yeah.
Share more. Wow,
It,
look at this.
it was just such a great experience. I mean, Barry's art lends itself because a lot of artists maybe don't understand lighting as well as perhaps they should, and they don't necessarily have these opportunities for a painter built into the art. But Barry, with his knowledge, he draws those opportunities in the art. And all I have to do is take what's there and take it to the next step. It's amazing. I felt like when I colored Barry's art, it's the first time in my career that I'm not kind of fighting what was drawn.
Wow.
And Jim used to have a saying where he's like, save it in the color,
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
But with Barry, you don't have to. You don't have to save anything in the color. All you have to do is build on this amazing foundation that he's created. And it allows incredible freedom for somebody who's a painter.
Wow.
I mean,
was he very collaborative? Did he give you kind of feedback as to like how he sees the colors, or did you just run with it because it was so easy to just kind of color over what was happening there?
No, he would give me amazing feedback. Amazing feedback. And I felt like when I was working with him, we were so in sync and so on the same page, aesthetic wise, that he could literally say one or two words and I'd be like, yes, and I would know exactly what he was talking about. I mean,
wow.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, the prism of light, these are so memorable. Moments like this.
Yeah.
So you wasn't it in Solar Zero that we had the largest comic page ever with the giant explosion or whatnot? So
yeah. I remember when Barry brought it in. It was the size of a wall. It was massive.
Really? How big? What page is that?
It's like 6 feet by 4 feet.
Wow. Wait, what?
Or maybe bigger. I mean, it was
huge.
massive. It was massive.
Wow.
And I remember the guys, we had 4 people. We had taken the top off of the copier, and we had 4 people holding this gigantic page onto the copier, trying to get copies of it that we could put together and then Xerox onto watercolor paper so I could color it. And I remember some years ago hearing that giant page was auctioned by Sotheby's for some astronomical price. I don't know.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, it's amazing. So
I originally sold the color to get a down payment on my mom's house.
So was the color that it wasn't that size? You were shrinking it down, right? So
right,
that you could,
right. Yeah, the color was double page spread size.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
A little more manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough. I bought a page recently from Solar Zero from Barry Windsor Smith.
Oh wow!
And so definitely one of the highlights of my collection. So
yeah, amazing.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that work.
Yeah, Dan Moeller, I think, has a good amount of these color guides. But yeah, from Solar Zero, it really does stand out as I look at these.
Yeah, I know Dan.
And then Iggy. Who's Iggy C? I'm not familiar with Iggy, but his name's coming up a lot.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of stuff. Yeah, Dan, he's like this Valiant historian. I mean, he's just got so much Valiant stuff.
Yeah, I've known him for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we can't wait to have him join us on one of these chats as well. But
yeah,
I think we're kind of landing on our second hour. JJ, anything else you want to share with the audience? I mean, obviously we highlight your Kickstarter, your website, your
Oh, sure.
publications. Anything else we could do to kind of rally behind what you're doing? Because you were very significant of our comic book fandom and childhood.
Oh,
So
thanks.
anything we could do to be supportive of what you're doing, please do let us know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as of right now, I'm just trying to, make a living from my art so that I can support the graphic novel and the coloring history book that I'm working on. So yeah, if anybody is moved to buy one of my books, please rate and review it on Amazon because that drives the algorithm.
Yes.
So, but yeah, no, that's been my kind of focus for this past year. That and I've done some work on books about musical theater because I'm a musical theater fan. So yeah.
Awesome.
I wrote a book on Phantom of the Opera, the evolution of the musical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I translated a German musical called Tanz der Vampire.
Oh wow.
And made a book out of that for my own. I flew to Germany in May to see Tanz der Vampire in Hamburg because I've been obsessed with that musical for a long time. But yeah, that's not something comics fans, I'm sure, are interested in.
So much material. Have you seen the recent Wicked movie yet?
I have not. I'm really suspicious of it.
Worth a look. I think I was a little hesitant because I was such a big fan of the musical.
Yes.
But if anything, the way I kind of been sharing it is it's a scaled version of a musical. So if you were to
that's interesting.
Think of it as the biggest scale version of it, that's what the movie is. So it's worth watching. It's pretty consistent with what happened in the musical. So
okay.
Yeah.
I had been a little bit hesitant about it because just the trailers, the acting kind of didn't seem up to the level of the Broadway show.
Yeah.
Like the acting seemed a little weak in the clips in the trailer, and I was kind of like, oh man, that has the potential to really grate on my nerves. So I haven't seen it yet, but obviously I will.
I'll vouch for the acting.
Obviously.
The acting's not bad. It's definitely
that's good.
Yeah, I feel like it does. Obviously, the trailer is very commercially driven, but I feel like the acting actually I'll vouch for sure. I think.
That's good. You're not the first person who said that, so I have a little more confidence. I might go ahead and rent it.
In fact, I have a whole new respect for Ariana Grande.
Okay.
She really brought it for this one. So
that's interesting. That's interesting.
Powerful. So, any other reflections, Jason, Newell? Lots of nostalgia today. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing just this journey with us, and it's amazing to see how much you've touched within the this library of stuff that we're fans of.
I mean, I was a part of like some great teams. Like it's been an amazing ride. I've been really fortunate, to be a part of, and that's the thing. It's like, the comic book that you hold in your hand has this massive weight of hundreds of people, who contributed to get to that point, to get to that book. And I think that's not, that's kind of not the front facing public perception. That's not what people see. And if I can give a little bit of insight into, just the contributions of behind the scenes, right down to the office manager, like people don't even know Debbie Fix's name. And yet her contribution to what we did, even though she wasn't drawing the comics or coloring the comics, her contribution to everything we did was not insignificant. Like it's such a team effort.
Well, so from my perspective, I don't have the same nostalgia as Jason and Carl that I didn't read it when I was a kid. I'm reading it for the first time now, but having all this added information that you've given us today is really interesting, and having that, like, it makes me even more wanting to dive in and continue to read the Valiant stuff and
Cool.
dig into it even deeper, and it's really great, and I appreciate all the stuff that you shared with us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I also really respect and appreciate the perspective, because often, when folks are joining any type of conversation about their creative input, they're really talking about their own creative input, but you were able to acknowledge all the different pieces that contribute to the overall aspect of what these products became, and I really appreciate that, because I'm a fan of that. I feel like some of the lesser known variables are often not recognized, and you highlighting even to the office manager, who I believe it was part of Formula. It's like the little, like, we've all seen, like, science fiction mad scientists, is that last drop that sometimes people never mention, but it is the secret sauce that makes everything work. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. And
well, if you're a film producer, you know what a group effort really is.
1000%.
I mean, you can't. Yeah, I've worked on a couple of films, indie films, and I mean, it's not something you can do all by yourself.
No, in fact, one of the biggest things about producing, folks things is it's about getting the one or two names and everything will fall into place, but it's not true. It's really about putting the right team and team chemistry together, and it's a journey, and I still make a lot of mistakes, but you kind of just build on that, as you make your run. But I also realize why a lot of folks that have found success in the feature film space came later in life, is because it takes a lot of life experience to understand how to put these teams together, and you have to make these mistakes and see the results before you are able to kind of make better products. So
yeah, it does. It takes incredible experience. Going back to musical theater again, I mean, the team is what made the Phantom of the Opera one of the top musicals of all time.
Yeah, Wicked as well. I mean, that the same crew run for 9 years. I mean, that's really powerful. So
absolutely, yeah.
All right, folks, amazing show today. We really appreciate you, JayJay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we look forward to having more of maybe even some of the folks you've mentioned on this conversation, because we do feel like Valiant, it's a classic part of comic book history that needs to be recognized. And so, yeah, Jason and I are on a mission, along with Noel, who's joined us as a new perspective. And so, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We'll be continuing this process, and super excited to dive in myself as we kind of get caught up with Valiant history.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stories there. You should definitely talk to more people.
Yes. All right, folks. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys on the next show.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.